In the early morning hours of March 3, 2025, while most Americans were asleep, a quiet but shattering alert was transmitted from the heart of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration (NOAA). The message wasn't broadcast with sirens or dramatic headlines. It arrived through a data bulletin, encrypted and targeted to institutions, scientific centers, government departments, major newsrooms. But within hours, the implications of that message had begun to ripple across the nation like a shockwave, a tsunami of understanding. The data showed one thing clearly: the Earth's oceans had crossed a threshold. The sensor's new satellite altimeters, Arctic and Antarctic buoy systems, and pressure plates along the ocean floor had recorded a threefold acceleration in sea level rise over the past 6 months. And this wasn't just a temporary anomaly. It was confirmed by over a dozen independent systems, international agencies, and glacial monitoring stations. Greenland was melting faster than any model had ever predicted. Antarctica's western ice shelves were collapsing at a near-continuous rate. Entire systems of subsea methane hydrate deposits were destabilizing, releasing potent greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And it wasn't just science anymore. It was survival. The bulletin outlined a sobering prediction. If current trends continued, and every indication said they would by the year 2030, New York City, Miami, and large portions of Los Angeles would be partially to completely underwater. The federal government had no choice but to respond immediately. For the first time in the history of the United States, a government agency issued a national advisory recommending the planned relocation of millions of American citizens from vulnerable coastal regions. This wasn't just a warning about hurricanes or sea surges. This was the beginning of what sociologists and environmental historians are now calling the American climate exodus.
In New York City, the decay is no longer creeping, it is cascading. By mid-April 2025, the first real signs of the city's unraveling began. Tourists visiting Lower Manhattan found water lapping not just at the harbor or Battery Park, but at the very edges of Wall Street. Financial executives used raised walkways in emergency boots to cross streets near South Ferry. Residents in the financial district and Seaport watched helplessly as the tides now arrived without storm-king tides, driven by the full moon and planetary alignment, now flooded their neighborhoods twice a day. But the real catastrophe was underground. The subways, the arterial veins of the city, began to flood not in response to hurricanes or rainfall, but simply because the ocean had begun pushing its way into the city's subterranean system. On April 20th, a viral video emerged showing a subway train in the J line attempting to move through a tunnel filled with 2 feet of seawater. The city immediately shut down 5 downtown stations. By June, 12 more were closed permanently. Rent in elevated areas like Washington Heights and Inwood exploded. In some cases, landlords doubled or tripled prices within weeks. The Bronx, long considered one of New York's most affordable boroughs, became a refuge for the climate displaced. People from Queens, Red Hook, and parts of Williamsburg packed their bags, leaving behind generations of memories and mortgages now worth nothing. Federal emergency shelters in upstate New York, initially designed for COVID-19 overflow, were retrofitted to house tens of thousands. By July 2025, New York State had designated 18 counties as climate refuge zones. These weren't war zones or disaster shelters. They were planned relocation areas for Americans who simply had nowhere else to go. The term climate refugee had entered the American vocabulary not as an abstract concept about Bangladesh or the Maldives, but as a living reality in Poughkeepsie, Albany, and Rochester. Miami was worse, infinitely worse. By May 2025, the iconic Ocean Drive had disappeared, not metaphorically, literally. Satellite images showed water stretching from Biscayne Bay to Collins Avenue. Seagrass replaced streets. Flamingos began nesting in what was once the parking lot of a luxury hotel. The Miami International Airport, the 12th busiest in the U.S., lost its southern runways to tidal erosion. Every day, flights were delayed because the tarmac was too wet to support aircraft weight. Airlines rerouted operations to Orlando and Jacksonville, but the damage was done. Tourism collapsed overnight. Worse still, the insurance industry walked away. State Farm, Allstate, and even global reinsurers like Munich Re announced they would no longer write policies for homes in over 85% of the Miami metro area. Mortgage companies followed. Properties couldn't be sold. They couldn't be refinanced. The American dream was not just dead, it was rotting in salt water. And so began the Great Inland Migration.
U-Haul prices hit $10,000 for a one-way move out of South Florida. Interstate corridors like I-75 and I-95 became informal refugee highways. Families lived out of RVs, sedans, even school buses. Cities like Atlanta, Charlotte, and Nashville were suddenly flooded not by water but by desperate humans. Every rest stop became a camp. Every Walmart parking lot turned into a makeshift shelter. In South Carolina, counties declared states of emergency not for floods but for infrastructure overload. By December 2025, over 3 million Americans had moved due to climate threats, not because they wanted to, because they had no choice. The American climate exodus had become the largest internal migration since the Great Depression, and it had only just begun. And then came Los Angeles. Unlike New York and Miami, LA wasn't drowning, it was burning. It was suffocating. It was crumbling. Saltwater had begun seeping into the freshwater aquifers that serve coastal LA. Residents in Santa Monica found their tap water tasting of salt. In Malibu, a 3-block section collapsed into a massive sinkhole that swallowed cars, streetlights, and part of a schoolyard. In Venice Beach, foundations were shifting under homes. Simultaneously, inland California was being cooked alive. In the Central Valley, temperatures hit 130 degrees Fahrenheit in July. Crops failed, livestock died. The heat dome refused to lift. The state's electric grid, designed decades ago, simply couldn't keep up. Each afternoon brought rolling blackouts. The elderly and medically vulnerable died in their homes. Firefighters battled 12 simultaneous megafires across the Sierra Nevada. California's dual disaster water collapse on the coast and fire inland made the state almost unlivable. And so the migration continued. But why now? Why so fast? The answer, scientists warned, was feedback loops. Earth's systems weren't breaking linearly. They were breaking exponentially. First, albedo collapse. As Arctic and Antarctic ice melted, Earth lost its reflective shield. More sunlight was absorbed. The planet got hotter. More ice melted. Second, permafrost collapse. From Siberia to Alaska, permafrost frozen soil was thawing. It released methane, a greenhouse gas 84 times more potent than CO, triggering even more warming. Third, ocean circulation collapse. The Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, which moderates weather from Africa to Europe to the Americas, was weakening. This led to chaotic, unseasonal, and deadly weather events worldwide. These weren't predictions anymore. They were happening. In response, the U.S. launched the Continental Resettlement Act. Signed in July 2025, it offered cash grants, tax credits, and fast-track citizenship options to anyone willing to relocate to designated climate-safe zones. Entire cities were being designed from scratch in the hills of Tennessee, in the plateaus of Missouri, and in the forests of Montana. These weren't tents, they were smart cities, powered by solar grids built for climate refugees. Places with names like New Liberty, Horizon City, and Fort Renewal. School curriculums shifted. Students were now learning climate resilience alongside math and history. Engineering classes taught flood-proof construction. Urban planning was no longer about highways, it was about elevation, water storage, and mobility. But the cost was enormous. New York's fall wiped for $1 trillion from the real estate sector. Miami's disappearance raced another to $1 trillion. Los Angeles, collapsing under heat, drought, and erosion, added $3 trillion more in losses. The bond market shuddered. Mortgage-backed securities began to default. China's sovereign wealth fund dumped $40 billion of U.S. property holdings. Wall Street fled, relocating to cities like Denver and Salt Lake. Real estate agents in Boise, Idaho were handling calls from Fortune 500 CEOs. The cultural fabric frayed. Inland states saw tensions explode. In Ohio, vigilante groups blocked highways, demanding IDs from new arrivals. In Montana, no vacancy for refugee signs appeared on government buildings. In parts of Texas, new laws prohibited renting homes to people from flood-affected counties. TikTok and YouTube were inundated with apocalyptic videos. Cars driving through flooded neighborhoods, families fleeing at night, megachurches preaching the end times. And yet, hope persisted. From the ashes of collapse rose innovation. Engineers developed floating homes that adjusted with tides. Architects designed cities on stilts. Startups sold seaweed-based protein bars that needed no land to grow. Desalination units shrank to the size of fridges. Communities formed in unexpected places, old mining towns in Utah, abandoned train stations in Kansas, empty malls in North Dakota. Nomadic tribes of solar-powered vans crisscrossed the country, building mutual aid networks. What was once a nation of cities was becoming a nation of survivors. By 2026, the Statue of Liberty's island was no longer accessible by boats surrounded by barriers. Tourists visited a holographic replica in Times Square instead. Half of New Orleans was abandoned. Boston built artificial islands offshore. Congress held emergency sessions in Colorado Springs. Washington, D.C. began sandbagging the National Mall. It wasn't just geography that was changing, it was identity. America, once defined by its coasts, was becoming something else entirely. And the final question was no longer, can we stop this? But what will we become? In this race against time, we are all migrants now. The United States of 2030 will not resemble the America of the 20th century. Its cities may be underwater, but its story isn't. Not yet.